Chapter 3. Half stunned, Bradley lay for a minute as he had fallen, and then slowly and painfully wriggled into a less uncomfortable position. He could see nothing of his surroundings in the gloom about him, until after a few minutes his eyes became accustomed to the dark interior, when he rolled them from side to side in survey of his prison. He discovered himself to be in a bare room, which was windowless, nor could he see any other opening than that through which he had been lowered. In one corner was a huddled mass that might have been almost anything from a bundle of rags to a dead body. Almost immediately after he had taken his bearings, Bradley commenced working with his bonds. He was a man of powerful physique, and as from the first, he had been imbued with a belief that the fiber ropes were too weak to hold him. He worked on with a firm conviction that sooner or later they would part to his strainings. After a matter of 5 minutes, he was positive that the strands about his wrists were beginning to give, but he was compelled to rest then from exhaustion. As he lay, his eyes rested upon the bundle in the corner, and presently he could have sworn that the thing moved. With eyes straining through the gloom, the man lay watching the grim and sinister thing in the corner. Perhaps his overwrought nerves were playing a sorry joke upon him. He thought of this, and also that his condition of utter helplessness might still further have stimulated his imagination. He closed his eyes and sought to relax his muscles and his nerves. But when he looked again, he knew that he had not been mistaken. The thing had moved. Now it lay in a slightly altered form and farther from the wall. It was nearer him. With renewed strength, Bradley strained at his bonds, his fascinated gaze still glued upon the shapeless bundle. No longer was there any doubt that it moved. He saw it rise in the center several inches and then creep closer to him. It sank and arose again, a headless, hideous, monstrous thing of menace. Its very silence rendered it the more terrible. Bradley was a brave man. Ordinarily, his nerves were of steel, but to be at the mercy of some unknown and nameless horror, to be unable to defend himself, it was these things that almost unstrung him, for at best he was only human. To stand in the open, even with the odds all against him, to be able to use his fists, to put up some sort of defense, to inflict punishment upon his adversary, then he could face death with a smile. It was not death that he feared now. It was that horror of the unknown that is part of the fiber of every son of woman. Closer and closer came the shapeless mass. Bradley lay motionless and listened. What was that he heard? Breathing? He could not be mistaken, and then from out of the bundle of rags issued a hollow groan. Bradley felt his hair rise upon his head. He struggled with the slowly parting strands that held him. The thing beside him rose up higher than before, and the Englishman could have sworn that he saw a single eye peering at him from among the tumbled cloth. For a moment the bundle remained motionless. Only the sound of breathing issued from it. Then there broke from it a maniacal laugh. Cold sweat stood upon Bradley's brow as he tugged for liberation. He saw the rags rise higher and higher above him, until at last they tumbled upon the floor from the body of a naked man, a thin, a bony, a hideous caricature of man that mouthed and mummed, and wobbling upon its weak and shaking legs, crumpled to the floor again, still laughing, laughing horribly. It crawled toward Bradley. "Food! Food!" it screamed. "There is a way out! There is a way out!" Dragging itself to his side, the creature slumped upon the Englishman's breast. "Food!" it shrilled, as with its bony fingers and its teeth, it sought the man's bare throat. "Food! There is a way out!" Bradley felt teeth upon his jugular. He turned and twisted, shaking himself free for an instant. But once more, with hideous persistence, the thing fastened itself upon him. The weak jaws were unable to send the dull teeth through the victim's flesh, but Bradley felt it pawing, 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 like a monstrous rat seeking his life's blood. The skinny arms now embraced his neck, holding the teeth to his throat against all his efforts to dislodge the thing. Weak as it was, it had strength enough for this in its mad efforts to eat. Mumbling as it worked, it repeated again and again, "Food! Food! There is a way out," until Bradley thought those two expressions alone would drive him mad. And all but mad he was, as with a final effort backed by almost maniacal strength, he tore his wrist from the confining bonds and, grasping the repulsive thing upon his breast, hurled it halfway across the room. Panting like a spent hound, Bradley worked at the thongs about his ankles while the maniac lay quivering and mumbling where it had fallen. Presently, the Englishman leaped to his feet, freer than he had ever before felt in all his life, though he was still hopelessly a prisoner in the blue place of Seven Skulls. With his back against the wall for support, so weak the reaction left him, Bradley stood watching the creature upon the floor. He saw it move and slowly raise itself to its hands and knees, where it swayed to and fro as its eyes roved about in search of him. And when at last they found him, there broke from the drawn lips the mumbled words, "Food, food, there is a way out." The pitiful supplication in the tones touched the Englishman's heart. He knew that this could be no Wiru, but possibly once a man like himself who had been cast into this pit of solitary confinement with this hideous result that might in time be his fate also. And then too, there was the suggestion of hope held out by the constant reiteration of the phrase, "There is a way out." Was there a way out? What did this poor thing know? "Who are you, and how long have you been here?" Bradley suddenly demanded. For a moment, the man upon the floor made no response. Then mumblingly came the words, "Food! Food!" "Stop!" commanded the Englishman. The injunction might have been barked from the muzzle of a pistol. It brought the man to a sitting posture, his hands off the ground. He stopped swaying to and fro and appeared to be startled into an attempt to master his faculties of concentration and thought. Bradley repeated his questions sharply. "I am Antak, the Galu," replied the man. "Luata alone knows how long I have been here. Maybe 10 moons, maybe 10 moons 3 times. It was the Caspakian equivalent of 30. I was young and strong when they brought me here. Now I am old and very weak. I am Kos Adalu. That is why they have not killed me. If I tell them the secret of becoming Kos Adalu, they will take me out. But how can I tell them that which Luata alone knows?" "What is Kos Adalu?" demanded Bradley. "Food! Food! There is a way out," mumbled the Galu. Bradley strode across the floor, seized the man by his shoulders and shook him. "Tell me," he cried. "What is Kos Adalu?" "Food," whimpered Antak. Bradley bethought himself. His haversack had not been taken from him. In it, besides his razor and knife, were odds and ends of equipment and a small quantity of dried meat. He tossed a small strip of the latter to the starving Galu. Antak seized upon it and devoured it ravenously. It instilled new life in the man. "What is Kos Atalu?" insisted Bradley again. Antak tried to explain. His narrative was often broken by lapses of concentration, during which he reverted to his plaintive mumbling for food and recurrence to the statement that there was a way out. But by firmness and patience, the Englishman drew out piecemeal a more or less lucid exposition of the remarkable scheme of evolution that rules in Caspak. In it, he found explanations of the hitherto inexplicable. He discovered why he had seen no babes or children among the Caspakian tribes with which he had come in contact. Why each more northerly tribe evinced a higher state of development than those south of them. Why each tribe included individuals ranging in physical and mental characteristics, from the highest of the next lower race to the lowest of the next higher. And why the women of each tribe immersed themselves each morning for an hour or more in the warm pools near which the habitations of their people always were located. And two, he discovered why those pools were almost immune from the attacks of carnivorous animals and reptiles. He learned that all but those who were Kos Adalu came up Kors Vajo, or from the beginning. The egg from which they first developed into tadpole form was deposited with millions of others in one of the warm pools, and with it a poisonous serum that the carnivora instinctively shunned. Down the warm stream from the pool floated the countless billions of eggs and tadpoles, developing as they drifted slowly toward the sea. Some became tadpoles in the pool, some in the sluggish stream, and some not until they reached the great inland sea. In the next stage, they became fishes or reptiles. Antok was not positive which, and in this form, always developing, they swam far to the south, where, amid the rank and teeming jungles, some of them evolved into amphibians. Always there were those whose development stopped at the first stage, others whose development ceased when they became reptiles, while by far the greater proportion formed the food supply of the ravenous creatures of the deep. Few indeed were those that eventually developed into baboons and then apes, which was considered by Caspakians the real beginning of evolution. From the egg then, the individual develops slowly into a higher form, just as the frog's egg develops through various stages from a fish with gills to a frog with lungs. With that thought in mind, Bradley discovered that it was not difficult to believe in the possibility of such a scheme. There was nothing new in it. From the ape, the individual, if it survived, slowly developed into the lowest order of man, the Alu, and then by degrees to Bolu, Stolu, Bandlu, Krolu, and finally Galu. And in each stage, countless millions of other eggs were deposited in the warm pools of the various races and floated down to the Great Sea to go through a similar process of evolution outside the womb as develops our own young within. But in Caspak, the scheme is much more inclusive, for it combines not only individual development, but the evolution of species and genera. If an egg survives, it goes through all the stages of development that man has passed through during the unthinkable eons since life first moved upon the Earth's face. The final stage, that which the Galus have almost attained, and for which all hope, is Kas-Atalu, which literally means no eggman, or one who is born directly as are the young of the outer world of mammals. Some of the Galus produce Kos-Atalu and Kos-Atalo both. The Wirus only Kos-Atalu. In other words, all Wirus are born male, and so they prey upon the Galus for their women and sometimes capture and torture the Galu men who are Kos-Atalu in an endeavor to learn the secret which they believe will give them unlimited power over all other denizens of Caspak. No Wirus come up from the beginning. All are born of the Wiru fathers and Galu mothers who are Kos-Atalo, and there are very few of the latter owing to the long and precarious stages of development. 7 generations of the same ancestor must come up from the beginning before a Kos-Atalu child may be born. And when one considers the frightful dangers that surround the vital spark from the moment it leaves the warm pool, where it has been deposited to float down to the sea, amid the voracious creatures that swarm the surface, and the deeps and the almost equally unthinkable trials of its effort to survive, after it once becomes a land animal and starts northward through the horrors of the Caspakian jungles and forests, it is plainly a wonder that even a single babe has ever been born to a Galu woman. 7 cycles it requires before the 7th Galu can complete the 7th danger-infested circle, since its first Galu ancestor achieved the state of Galu. For ages before, the ancestors of this first Galu may have developed from a Bandlu or Bolu egg without ever once completing the whole circle. That is, from a Galu egg back to a fully developed Galu. Bradley's head was whirling before he even commenced to grasp the complexities of Caspakian evolution. But as the truth slowly filtered into his understanding, as gradually it became possible for him to visualize the scheme, it appeared simpler. In fact, it seemed even less difficult of comprehension than that with which he was familiar. For several minutes after Antok ceased speaking, his voice having trailed off weakly into silence, neither spoke again. Then the Galu recommenced his, "Food, food, there is a way out." Bradley tossed him another bit of dried meat, waiting patiently until he had eaten it, this time more slowly. "What do you mean by saying there is a way out?" he asked. "He who died here just after I came told me," replied Antok. "He said there was a way out, that he had discovered it, but was too weak to use his knowledge. He was trying to tell me how to find it when he died." Oh, Luada, if he had lived but a moment more. "They do not feed you here?" asked Bradley. "No, they give me water once a day. That is all." "But how have you lived then?" "The lizards and the rats," replied Antok. "The lizards are not so bad, but the rats are foul to taste. However, I must eat them or they would eat me, and they are better than nothing. But of late they do not come so often, and I have not had a lizard for a long time. I shall eat, though," he mumbled. "I shall eat now, for you cannot remain awake forever." He laughed, a cackling, dry laugh. "When you sleep, Antak will eat." It was horrible. Bradley shuddered. For a long time each sat in silence. The Englishman could guess why the other made no sound. He awaited the moment that sleep should overcome his victim. In the long silence there was borne upon Bradley's ears a faint, monotonous sound as of running water. He listened intently. It seemed to come from far beneath the floor. "What is that noise?" he asked. "That sounds like water running through a narrow channel." "It is the river," replied Antak. "Why do you not go to sleep? It passes directly beneath the blue place of 7 skulls. It runs through the temple grounds, beneath the temple, and under the city. When we die, they will cut off our heads and throw our bodies into the river. At the mouth of the river await many large reptiles. Thus do they feed. The Wirus do likewise with their own dead, keeping only the skulls and the wings. Come, let us sleep." "Do the reptiles come up the river into the city?" asked Bradley. "The water is too cold. They never leave the warm water of the great pool," replied Antak. "Let us search for the way out," suggested Bradley. Antak shook his head. "I have searched for it all these moons," he said. "If I could not find it, how would you?" Bradley made no reply but commenced a diligent examination of the walls and floor of the room, pressing over each square foot and tapping with his knuckles. About 6 feet from the floor, he discovered a sleeping perch near one end of the apartment. He asked Antak about it, but the Galu said that no Wiru had occupied the place since he had been incarcerated there. Again and again, Bradley went over the floor and walls as high up as he could reach. Finally, he swung himself to the perch, that he might examine at least one end of the room all the way to the ceiling. In the center of the wall, close to the top, an area about 3 feet square gave forth a hollow sound when he rapped upon it. Bradley felt over every square inch of that area with the tips of his fingers. Near the top, he found a small, round hole, a trifle larger in diameter than his forefinger, which he immediately stuck into it. The panel, if such it was, seemed about 1 inch thick, and beyond it his finger encountered nothing. Bradley crooked his finger upon the opposite side of the panel and pulled toward him, steadily but with considerable force. Suddenly the panel flew inward, nearly precipitating the man to the floor. It was hinged at the bottom, and when lowered, the outer edge rested upon the perch, making a little platform parallel with the floor of the room. Beyond the opening was an utterly dark void. The Englishman leaned through it and reached his arm as far as possible into the blackness, but touched nothing. Then he fumbled in his haversack for a match, a few of which remained to him. When he struck it, Antak gave a cry of terror. Bradley held the light far into the opening before him, and in its flickering rays saw the top of a ladder descending into a black abyss below. How far down it extended he could not guess, but that he should soon know definitely he was positive. "You have found it! You have found the way out!" screamed Antak. "Oh, Luata, and now I am too weak to go! Take me with you! Take me with you!" "Shut up," admonished Bradley. "You will have the whole flock of birds around our heads in a minute, and neither of us will escape. Be quiet, and I'll go ahead. If I find a way out, I'll come back and help you, if you'll promise not to try to eat me up again." "I promise," cried Antak. "Oh, Luata, how could you blame me? I am half crazed of hunger and long confinement, and the horror of the lizards and the rats, and the constant waiting for death." "I know," said Bradley simply. "I'm sorry for you, old top. Keep a stiff upper lip." And he slipped through the opening, found the ladder with his feet, closed the panel behind him, and started downward into the darkness. Below him rose more and more distinctly the sound of running water. The air felt damp and cool. He could see nothing of his surroundings and felt nothing but the smooth, worn sides and rungs of the ladder, down which he felt his way cautiously, lest a broken rung or a misstep should hurl him downward. As he descended thus slowly, the ladder seemed interminable, and the pit bottomless. Yet he realized when at last he reached the bottom that he could not have descended more than 50 feet. The bottom of the ladder rested on a narrow ledge paved with what felt like large round stones, but what he knew from experience to be human skulls. He could not but marvel as to where so many countless thousands of the things had come from, until he paused to consider that the infancy of Caspak dated doubtlessly back into remote ages, far beyond what the outer world considered the beginning of earthly time. For all these eons, the Wirus might have been collecting human skulls from their enemies and their own dead, enough to have built an entire city of them. Feeling his way along the narrow ledge, Bradley came presently to a blank wall that stretched out over the water swirling beneath him, as far as he could reach. Stooping, he groped about with one hand, reaching down toward the surface of the water, and discovered that the bottom of the wall arched above the stream. How much space there was between the water and the arch he could not tell, nor how deep the former. There was only one way in which he might learn these things, and that was to lower himself into the stream. For only an instant he hesitated, weighing his chances. Behind him lay almost certainly the horrid fate of Antak. Before him, nothing worse than a comparatively painless death by drowning. Holding his haversack above his head with one hand, he lowered his feet slowly over the edge of the narrow platform. Almost immediately, he felt the swirling of cold water about his ankles, and then with a silent prayer, he let himself drop gently into the stream. Great was Bradley's relief when he found the water no more than waist deep and beneath his feet a firm gravel bottom. Feeling his way cautiously, he moved downward with the current, which was not so strong as he had imagined from the noise of the running water. Beneath the first arch, he made his way, following the winding curvatures of the right-hand wall. After a few yards of progress, his hand came suddenly in contact with a slimy thing clinging to the wall, a thing that hissed and scuttled out of reach. What it was, the man could not know, but almost instantly there was a splash in the water just ahead of him, and then another. On he went, passing beneath other arches at varying distances, and always in utter darkness. Unseen denizens of this great sewer, disturbed by the intruder, splashed into the water ahead of him and wriggled away. Time and again his hand touched them, and never for an instant could he be sure that at the next step some gruesome thing might not attack him. He had strapped his haversack about his neck, well above the surface of the water, and in his left hand he carried his knife. Other precautions there were none to take. The monotony of the blind trail was increased by the fact that from the moment he had started from the foot of the ladder, he had counted his every step. He had promised to return for Antak if it proved humanly possible to do so, and he knew that in the blackness of the tunnel, he could locate the foot of the ladder in no other way. He had taken 269 steps. Afterward, he knew that he should never forget that number, when something bumped gently against him from behind. Instantly, he wheeled about and with knife ready to defend himself, stretched forth his right hand to push away the object that now had lodged against his body. His fingers, feeling through the darkness, came in contact with something cold and clammy. They passed to and fro over the thing until Bradley knew that it was the face of a dead man floating upon the surface of the stream. With an oath, he pushed his gruesome companion out into midstream to float on down toward the great pool and the awaiting scavengers of the deep. At his 413th step, another corpse bumped against him. How many had passed him without touching, he could not guess. But suddenly he experienced the sensation of being surrounded by dead faces floating along with him, all set in hideous grimaces, their dead eyes glaring at this profaning alien who dared intrude upon the waters of this river of the dead. A horrid escort, pregnant with dire forebodings and with menace. Though he advanced very slowly, he tried always to take steps of about the same length, so that he knew that though considerable time had elapsed, yet he had really advanced no more than 400 yards, when ahead he saw a lessening of the pitch darkness, and at the next turn of the stream his surroundings became vaguely discernible. Above him was an arched roof, and on either hand, walls pierced at intervals by apertures covered with wooden doors. Just ahead of him, in the roof of the aqueduct, was a round, black hole about 30 inches in diameter. His eyes still rested upon the opening when there shot downward from it to the water below the naked body of a human being, which almost immediately rose to the surface again and floated off down the stream. In the dim light, Bradley saw that it was a dead Weiroo, from which the wings and head had been removed. A moment later, another headless body floated past, recalling what Antak had told him of the skull-collecting customs of the Weiroo. Bradley wondered how it happened that the first corpse he had encountered in the stream had not been similarly mutilated. The farther he advanced now, the lighter it became. The number of corpses was much smaller than he had imagined, only 2 more passing him before, at 600 steps, or about 500 yards, from the point he had taken to the stream. He came to the end of the tunnel and looked out upon sunlit water, running between grassy banks. One of the last corpses to pass him was still clothed in the white robe of a Weiroo, blood stained over the headless neck that it concealed. Drawing closer to the opening leading into the bright daylight, Bradley surveyed what lay beyond. A short distance before him, a large building stood in the center of several acres of grass in tree-covered ground, spanning the stream which disappeared through an opening in its foundation wall. From the large saucer-shaped roof and the vivid colorings of the various heterogeneous parts of the structure, he recognized it as the temple past which he had been born to the blue place of 7 skulls. To and fro flew Weiroos, going to and from the temple. Others passed on foot across the open grounds, assisting themselves with their great wings, so that they barely skimmed the earth. To leave the mouth of the tunnel would have been to court instant discovery and capture, but by what other avenue he might escape, Bradley could not guess, unless he retraced his steps up the stream and sought egress from the other end of the city. The thought of traversing that dark and horror-ridden tunnel for perhaps miles he could not entertain. There must be some other way. Perhaps after dark he could steal through the temple grounds and continue on downstream until he had come beyond the city. And so he stood and waited until his limbs became almost paralyzed with cold, and he knew that he must find some other plan for escape. A half-formed decision to risk an attempt to swim underwater to the temple was crystallizing, in spite of the fact that any chance Weiroo flying above the stream might easily see him, when again a floating object bumped against him from behind and lodged across his back. Turning quickly, he saw that the thing was what he had immediately guessed it to be, a headless and wingless Weiroo corpse. With a grunt of disgust, he was about to push it from him when the white garment enshrouding it suggested a bold plan to his resourceful brain. Grasping the corpse by an arm, he tore the garment from it and then let the body float downward toward the temple. With great care, he draped the robe about him. The bloody blotch that had covered the severed neck he arranged about his own head. His haversack he rolled as tightly as possible and stuffed beneath his coat over his breast. Then he fell gently to the surface of the stream and, lying upon his back, floated downward with the current and out into the open sunlight. Through the weave of the cloth, he could distinguish large objects. He saw a Weiroo flap dismally above him. He saw the banks of the stream float slowly past. He heard a sudden wail upon the right-hand shore, and his heart stood still lest his ruse had been discovered. But never by a move of a muscle did he betray that aught but a cold lump of clay floated there upon the bosom of the water. And soon, though it seemed an eternity to him, the direct sunlight was blotted out, and he knew that he had entered beneath the temple. Quickly he felt for bottom with his feet, and as quickly stood erect, snatching the bloody, clammy cloth from his face. On both sides were blank walls, and before him, the river turned a sharp corner and disappeared. Feeling his way cautiously forward, he approached the turn and looked around the corner. To his left was a low platform about a foot above the level of the stream, and onto this he lost no time in climbing, for he was soaked from head to foot, cold and almost exhausted. As he lay resting on the skull-paved shelf, he saw in the center of the vault above the river another of those sinister round holes through which he momentarily expected to see a headless corpse shoot downward in its last plunge to a watery grave. A few feet along the platform, a closed door broke the blankness of the wall. As he lay looking at it and wondering what lay behind, his mind filled with fragments of many wild schemes of escape, it opened and a white-robed Weiroo stepped out upon the platform. The creature carried a large wooden basin filled with rubbish. Its eyes were not upon Bradley, who drew himself to a squatting position and crouched as far back in the corner of the niche in which the platform was set as he could force himself. The weiroo stepped to the edge of the platform and dumped the rubbish into the stream. If it turned away from him as it started to retrace its steps to the doorway, there was a small chance that it might not see him. But if it turned toward him, there was none at all. Bradley held his breath. The weiroo paused a moment, gazing down into the water. Then it straightened up and turned toward the Englishman. Bradley did not move. The weiroo stopped and stared intently at him. It approached him questioningly. Still, Bradley remained as though carved of stone. The creature was directly in front of him. It stopped. There was no chance on earth that it would not discover what he was. With the quickness of a cat, Bradley sprang to his feet and with all his great strength, backed by his heavy weight, struck the weiroo upon the point of the chin. Without a sound, the thing crumpled to the platform, while Bradley, acting almost instinctively to the urge of the first law of nature, rolled the inanimate body over the edge into the river.